Liora Finch had a habit of reading the instructions no one else noticed. Not the ones printed on boxes. Those were mostly apologies in disguise, but the loopy sentences the world whispered under its breath. "Mind the step that thinks it is a wave," murmured the pier. "Turn the key left if you mean it," suggested the door. "Do not feed the clock," advised the clock. Advising clocks were generally reliable. On the last day of June, the sky above Renfield wore a flat gray hat and forgot to take it off. Liora was supposed to be helping her Aunt Peony line seed packets in alphabetical order, A for alyssum, Z for zigzag vine, which Aunt said she had made up simply to keep the alphabet tidy. But Leora's attention kept escaping through the window and trotting down the street with the stray thoughts. When she finally confessed to the great, generous boredom of the afternoon, Aunt Peony, who hid laughter in the cabinets for emergencies, set a tin of ginger snaps on the counter and said, "Take the compost out, and while you're at it, give the garden my excuses. I told it I'd be dazzling today, but I find myself occupied with being ordinary." Liora made the compost look heavier than it was to excuse how quickly she wanted to be outside. Behind the house, a narrow lane ran between the fence and the backs of other people's stories. Aunt Peony's garden had many polite plants and one impolite plum tree that tossed fruit into the path like ideas, without caring who stepped on them. That's when Liora saw the moth. It was not a leaf with ambitions, it was a moth. Wings like paper peeled from an old book. There were faint lines on them, as if someone had tried to write the weather down and given up halfway through a sentence. The moth settled on the post by the gate and flexed its wings in a way that Leora's eyes read as "Follow me." "You'll make me look foolish," she told it. "Yes," said the moth, "but in the right company." Liora blinked. Words from mouths are everyday. Words from wings are suspicious. But the air around the moth had decided to behave like conversation, and Liora had always been courteous to the unusual. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Down," said the moth of misplaced notes, as if that were the most straightforward answer in the world. It lifted and drifted into the potting shed, which smelled of damp peat and secrets. Between the sacks of soil and the jar of buttons that Aunt Peony kept in case she ever sewed a shirt for a square, a narrow door huddled in the wall. Liora had never seen it before, which is exactly what you say when something has become real at last. The door was painted the blue of a bruise, trying not to be dramatic. On it, a brass label read, "Downstairs." "Who's downstairs?" Liora asked. "Not yours yet," said the moth. It landed on the label. The brass felt, when Liora touched it, like a coin worn in a pocket. She opened the door. A narrow stair spiraled away, close and unsure. It smelled faintly of cardamom and dust and a clever idea. The steps were too shallow for feet or too deep for reason. Liora considered going to fetch Aunt Peony. She considered making tea. She considered, most daring of all, doing none of those things and taking the first step as if it belonged to her. Her foot found the stair. The stair found her foot acceptable. Liora took another. The staircase folded around her like a fan deciding to be a road. The moth rode the air ahead, leaving a thin trail of scribble in the dimness, as if it had stolen a sentence and was trying it on. The air changed the way air does when you leave one kind of space and enter another. Warmth reset. The scent of things you haven't yet met moved in. Sound learned different manners. Liora went down, which was also forward, which was also a sort of remembering. She emerged into a hall that did not know whether it preferred to be a tunnel or a ballroom and had split the difference by being both. The floor tiles had arranged themselves into a chessboard and promptly forgotten the rules. Lamps hung in cages shaped like thimbles. A sign on the wall read, "Welcome to the Eitherwhere. Please keep your thoughts in their original packaging." Left, the Department of Unreasonable Stares. Right, the Ministry of Umbrellas, open in all weather. A figure stood just beneath the sign, as if waiting for the correct adverb. It wore a coat stitched from maps that had gone out of date but still insisted they were relevant. Its hat was the sort that knows where it belongs but takes a scenic route to get there. Its face was not exactly old or young. It was the sort of face that made you think it had seen a great deal and decided to like only half. "Ah," said the person, clapping their hands as if greeting an idea that had agreed to coffee. "You've brought your manners. And your moth. Good. I am Pallas. Pronouns come and go. Pallas will do. I fetch unfortunate travelers and fortunate trouble. Which do you intend to be?" "I hadn't intended either," Liora said, which was not true but polite. "I am Liora Finch. My aunt is expecting me to return with nothing more strange than an empty bin." "We can return you with an empty bin," Pallas said gravely. "We can also return you with a full story. We are very good at inventory." They bowed to the moth. "Did you bring her by shortcut or accident?" "Neither," said the moth. "I brought her by the fold between those. She reads margins." "Ah," Pallas said again, as if this solved both of their lives. Mind the Department of Unreasonable Stares, they resent being used. "This way." They set off down the hall. The lamps chimed to themselves. Liora tried to place the taste of the air. It was like biting a new word and discovering it had seeds. She passed a door labeled cautious tea and another labeled absolutely no loud furniture. Pallas swanned where Liora walked, which looked exhausting if you weren't built for it. "How many people come this way?" she asked. "Fewer than used to, more than yesterday," said Pallas. "The Eitherwhere has been sulking, and when she sulks, she misplaces her threads. We fetch them back. You look thread-like in the best sense." A corridor opened onto a square. Buildings leaned on one another like jokes. An orchestra of spoons practiced under an awning stitched from umbrellas. People moved through the square with the attentive care of those who have learned that assumptions are full of pepper. Liora saw a man selling shadows from a cart. They were neatly folded and labeled for reading, for naps, for polite vanishing. A woman in a gown the color of a ringing bell scolded a clock for pretending to be bigger than its hands. Two children argued with a door that insisted it would only open if addressed by its full name. The sky wore three opinions at once, but at least they were all a shade of blue. Pallas stopped in front of a building that had been a house in a past life and become a library out of revenge. Steps led up to a door fitted with the sort of brass handle that expects better of you. On the lintel, carved neat as honesty, were the words "the house of the first answer." Inside, the air smelled like clean paper and the end of a good joke. Shelves as tall as they needed to be held not books but boxes, each labeled in careful hand. The answer you thought of first but did not say, the answer that would have gotten you cake. A person with a keen pencil tucked behind one ear and a look on their face like a question was a friend, not a challenge, stood behind a desk. They wore a vest of ruled paper. On their name tag, "Clerk, Rue." "New arrival," Pallas said, as if announcing a parcel to the weather. "Margin reader. Delivered by Moth. Presently in scheduled." Rue leaned forward and peered at Liora as if she were a map whose legend had been printed in lemon and needed warming to be read. "Did you fall?" they asked. "No," Liora said. "I followed." She realized saying it aloud had the sound of truth. "I don't much like falling. It feels like someone else's verb." Followers have better ankles than fallers, Rue said, scribbling in a ledger that may or may not have been writing them a letter back. They slid a small card across the desk. Guessed, with intent. Rules? They asked. Please, Liora said. Rue counted on ink-stained fingers. Do not give anyone your name wearing its Sunday clothes. Do not eat the first food offered unless you can afford its story. If a person offers to carry your shadow, decline unless you are certain their pockets are safe. Be impolite to doors that flirt with you. Be polite to chairs. They remember. And if I meet a queen? Liora asked, because even sensible girls like to know where they stand with crowns. Rue's pencil hesitated. We don't do queens here, they said kindly. We do committees who think they are quilts and quilts who think they are committees. If anyone asks you to shout off with anything, ask them whether they prefer cake or sandwiches and propose a compromise. Very good, Pallas murmured. We're expecting a complaint, are we? Liora said, who had not expected anything so thrilling. The Eitherwhere is the piece of the world where contradiction goes to school, Pallas said. Sometimes someone forgets to do their homework and starts a parade. Today's parade is the procession of lost replies. They get louder as they go. The umbrella ministry hates getting wet with other people's opinions. We keep the peace between umbrellas and rain. That seems sensible, Liora said, and the moth approved. They were about to step back into the square when a door across the hall selected Liora with a sound like the beginning of a sneeze. It had not been there a moment ago, and yet its hinges looked worn with welcome. The plaque read, "The Room of Overheard Plans." I should not, Pallas said, and then cheerfully did. 5 minutes, they told Liora, and we pretend we came here on purpose. The Room of Overheard Plans smelled like soap that had been braved for too long. On a long table lay maps of rooms that did not agree with their walls, notes in a hand that kept changing styles to suit its temper, a teapot that was considering joining a union. In the center stood a large glass jar full of folded paper boats. The label read, "Plans that sounded good at the time. Shall we?" Pallas said. They unscrewed the lid and took out the smallest boat. It unfolded itself with an eager sigh. Plan. Move the staircase so we won't have to climb it. Result. The staircase will follow us. The staircase will be offended. We will apologize to a staircase. Again, Liora laughed. She could not help it. The room made laughing feel like sweeping, necessary and honest. A voice on the far side of the table, however, did not laugh. "Who is in my room?" it said, each word walking on a different kind of shoe. A person emerged from the stack of maps as if stepping through curtains. They were taller than fences and wore a coat that looked like a musical instrument had decided to become tailored. Their hair was made of storms that had learned discipline. On their lapel, Director of Etiquette, Department of Unreasonable Stares. "Hello," said Liora. "We were not planning to be here and would like to return this plan unconsidered." The director looked at her as if Liora were a square expecting to be invited to a circle. "Stairs are owed respect," they announced. "Stairs are the spines of buildings and should be addressed as such." "They are often not," Pallas said. "Sometimes they are treated as scenery. We were in fact on our way to tell them the procession will be loud so they may brace themselves." Said the director. "Is there to be a procession? Should we put out chairs?" "Always put out chairs," Pallas said. "We may have listeners. May we borrow the small plan? It has a moral and fits in a pocket." The director waved a hand. "Take 3. Bring me one that says let's build a ramp. It is time we became modern." They leaned down to the jar and frowned at the folded boats as if scolding them for not becoming bridges. "And who are you?" they added, eyes on Liora. Liora Finch, Liora said. Guessed, with intent. My aunt expects me back by supper time, not having rewritten any furniture. Admirable, said the director, who had perhaps once been a chair. Go with Pallas. Keep your ankles. Bow very slightly to the stone when you cross it. They left with 2 plans and a new scent in the air. The parading of a problem. In the square, the procession of lost replies had begun. It looked like 1,000 letters that had neglected to be posted and had decided if they walked in a body the post would be shamed into noticing. They floated at shoulder height, flapping their unlicked stamps. Their addresses read. I said it quietly, to whom it may regret, dear lucky break, to you, when you're ready. A woman with a megaphone, which had the good sense to be shy, marched at the front. She wore a sash that said recovered questions. Make way for what we meant to say, she cried. Make way for replies that went to the wrong house. Umbrellas, Pallas said, pointing. From beneath the awning, a respectable custody of umbrellas emerged, headed by a tall, handsome parasol with an ivory handle. They opened, not to keep off rain, but to catch the drifting replies before they got stuck in the trees. Every reply that landed safely was read aloud in a voice that matched it, then delivered to the person who needed it, no matter how far away that person lived. This is one of the laws of the Eitherwhere, and no one has found a way around it. Liora stood with the moth on her shoulder and felt, for the first time, the almost true that hums under a parade when the parade is not angry but determined. We didn't say it then. We are saying it now. It raised goosebumps in the shape of commas. A letter nosed toward her. Its stamp was a tiny plum. The address read, for the aunt who keeps the good jokes in the cabinet. Liora reached out. The paper warmed her palm. What's in it? Pallas asked, not nosy, hopeful. Liora unfolded the letter. In her aunt's looping hand. I am dazzling on ordinary days and you do not have to pretend I am not. Liora said. She laughed the sort of laugh that makes you choose to cry later, when you can afford it. The parasol swept forward. All well? It inquired, its voice rich as a cello that had learned the humor of being a parasol. All well, said Liora, and the parasol bowed in a way that made you want to sit up straighter. Across the square, at the entrance to a street lined with doors of equal height and insolent variety, a door much too tall for its hinges had been propped open with a bucket of sand. On its lintel, North Zig. From within came a sound like a sentence learning to dance. Pallas cocked their head. The Minister of Umbrellas will want to talk, they said. And the Department of Unreasonable Stares will insist on hosting. Which means there will be sandwiches. Which means there will be a meeting. I am not dressed for important sandwiches, Liora said. You are, Pallas returned. You remembered to bring your intent and your ankles. The rest is garnish. They led her into North Zig, which was a lane in a hurry, full of small shops that sold trust and string and excuses in tasteful jars. At the end of the lane a building widened, as if relieved to have the room. On its door, the parlor of almost agreements. Do wipe your feet, we have enough dust of our own. Inside, chairs introduced themselves by creak. The Minister of Umbrellas, who was not an umbrella at all but a person whose coat resembled rain-learning choreography, presided at a round table. The Director of Unreasonable Stares took a seat with a sigh of stone. A teapot the size of a good argument patrolled the edges. Representatives from locks, keys, letters, and lamps sat in their circles, not quite touching, like planets pretending to be mice. We have a problem, announced the minister, and a parade, which I am not opposed to. The problem is this. Our replies have been arriving late to their conversations. The parade helps. It does not fix the seam. Seam, said Liora, who was new, but could not help herself. Like a folded staircase. Exactly like a folded staircase, said the director, giving her a look of patient admiration. We suspect, the minister continued, that the seam runs under the stairs by the house of first answer, along the field of North Zig, and out under the ink arcade. It catches intent and turns it by half a degree, which is often the difference between a hello and a missed hello. We require a wayfinder. Everyone looked, not at Pallas, who was certainly a way of finding, but at Liora. She tried to hide behind her intention, it was too thin. She tried to hide behind the moth, it was paper. She tried to hide behind politeness, it bowed and ushered her forward. I don't know how, she said. You are already doing it, said the moth at her ear. It is like reading the instructions no one else has noticed, added Pallas. It is a job, said the director, which made it less terrifying and more true. Liora set her hand on the table, which was made of the kind of wood that remembers how trees settle arguments. All right, she said. But if I am to find a seam, someone must come with me to teach me how to stitch. The minister of umbrellas nodded. Consent, they said. Director, lend her a thread and a needle. Pallas, lend her your map. Moth, lend her your habit of dog-earing the right page. And what will you lend? Pallas asked the minister. My hat, the minister said solemnly. For weather. They prepared. Someone produced sandwiches. The teapot returned feeling useful. The parade, as parades do, began to loop back and cannibalize its own tail. Liora slid the plum-stamped letter into her pocket. The brass strip on her wrist hummed once and then settled into a count she had never heard before but immediately wanted to hum along with. 7. Pause. 3. Sweep. If you are finished being accidental, said the director of unreasonable stares, we are precisely ready to begin being deliberate. And Liora, who had been following, set her hand on the door and went first. North Zig ended, as all hurried streets must, in a little square where the weather apologized. The apology took the form of a fountain whose water rose politely, paused to consider other options, and fell where it had been expected to. Liora, Pallas, the moth, and the director of unreasonable stares stepped around the apology and into a passage where the ceiling stooped to hear secrets. Seems, said the director, are excuses that discovered they could be useful. They hold things together in places where a single line would sulk. But sometimes a seam forgets which side it belongs to and begins to collect wanderers on the wrong one. That is our seam. She has gotten social. That sounds lonely, Liora said. It is, said the director. Lonely seems gossip. Pallas pressed a square of paper into Liora's hand. It was a map, in the sense that it had drawn lines and names and refused to explain them. 3 roots twined like plaited hair. One was labeled sensible, one sensibler, and one senseless but accurate. We'll take the third, Pallas said. It won't look right between corners, but it lands perfectly at doors. The moth circled a lamplight to encourage it and then rested on Liora's shoulder, light as lint. You are thinking of Aunt Peony, it observed. I am, Liora said. It is very loud to be away and not tell a person who keeps jokes in cabinets. Bring her back something you can fold, Pallas suggested. She will understand folded things. They turned left at a door that read not yet and went through it, because this is the Eitherwhere, where certain denials are invitations if you bring a laugh. The corridor narrowed until it remembered it could be wider. Pallas bought a bundle of miscellaneous string from a vending tray with the confident flick of someone who had been poor and hated it and would not be again. Do we need that? Liora asked. Yes, said Pallas. And also no. String is the kind of purchase that justifies itself. They arrived at the house of first answer by its back stairs. The stairs, being unreasonable, had written a letter to the editor. Liora bowed slightly, as instructed, and the stairs stopped muttering. Rue, the clerk with the pencil behind their ear, looked up from their ledger and smiled without being told to. I thought you'd be back, they said. The moth owes me 2 seeds. The moth preened. I am not paying in seeds, I am paying in work. The world enjoys a story with hands. Rue passed Liora a spool of thread the color of unscented sea. For tacking a thought to a doorstep, they said. Temporarily. Permanent stitches required tea. They went out into the lane between the house and the ink arcade, and there Liora felt it, how to say, the becoming. As if the space between 2 bricks had decided it was a hallway and expected to be greeted. The seam hummed like a tune someone had started in the next room and was shy about owning. It untidily collected gossip from left and right. That was why replies were arriving late. The seam had become a sticky place for answers to stop and admire themselves before going on. Hello, Liora said to the seam, which is not madness if you have learned by now how rooms appreciate being treated as persons. You seem to have opinions. Would you like a job? The seam, offended and flattered, quivered. Count for us, Liora continued, keeping her voice in the key of kindly. 7. Pause. 3. Sweep. Keep time for the replies. Let them go on the 7th. Keep them a moment on the pause. Release 3 at once so the air feels clever. Sweep them around the corner when they'd rather bask. The seam liked this. It was, after all, lonely. No one had asked it to keep time before. It arranged itself. The waywards arrange themselves, which is to say reluctantly and then obligingly. How did you think to ask? The director asked, in a tone that had nothing of exam in it and everything of admiration. I listened to the count my strip is keeping, Liora said. It's very likely wrong, and it is also useful. Pallas nodded as if Liora had passed an unannounced interview. The moth delicately chewed the corner of the map to mark a place. Now to the ink arcade, Pallas said. If the seam is social, she is also vain. She will want a mirror. The ink arcade was not a mall. Nothing in Eitherwhere would be caught dead being a mall, but an arched walkway where people sold words in forms that could be carried without breaking. Broadsides, brooches, pies with letters on top. Sentences iced onto biscuits and sugar so glassy you could see through it to your good ideas. There was a stout timbered stall at the end advertising harnessed mirrors. What do they harness? Liora asked. Not who, Pallas corrected. What? These mirrors harness self-regard. You hang one where you need a room to be a bit vain. It will improve its posture and stop spilling things. There was a period when we put them everywhere and everyone became impossible. We've learned moderation. The mirror monger was a woman with serious buns and hairpins like lightning. I will sell you one if you promise not to use it on a person, she said, which made Liora want to hug her and made Pallas respect her. Rooms only. Lanes optional. Stairs discouraged unless they have been to therapy. We have a seam, Liora said. She needs something to preen into that isn't delays. A little one, then, the monger decided. Half the size of a plate, enough to catch the eye without teaching it bad habits. She handed Liora a circular mirror whose frame was carved with numbers that went around the circumference, then repeated themselves as overlapping ghosts. It will count with you if you teach it to and will cease if it is bored. I wish some people would do that, said the director under their breath. They set the harnessed mirror in the lane at the seam's shoulder. The seam tried to pocket it. Seams will, if you do not watch them, then thought better of it when the numbers along the edge lit up in a sequence that exactly matched Leora's humming. 7. Rest. 3. Rest, sweep. The mirror glowed very slightly each time a reply went by on time. The lane felt taller, as if someone had praised it for standing straight. "There," said Pallas. "We have caught vanity and made it public service." "That was easier than I feared," Leora admitted, which is the kind of sentence you should never say near stairs. They will take it personally. The stair behind the house of first answer groaned. A riser jutted like a chin. A step stretched as if it had been sitting too long at a dull meeting and wanted to show what it could do. From the shadows at the landing, a shuffle of authority approached. Out of it came 3 people in a hat. The hat was tall and wore itself as a career. The people were stitched from supposition. They were the Committee of Opposite Common Sense, which meant they did the very sensible thing of telling people to stop doing sensible things when sensible things had ceased to be helpful. "We have a complaint," said the chair of the committee, who had a stripe of chalk across their trousers. "The stairs are jealous of the lane because the lane gets a seam and a mirror and the applause of replies, and the stairs are, we quote, stuck being up and down when they would like to be toward. We could assign the stairs a toward," offered the secretary for plausible distraction. "Nothing too ambitious. A toward to the left. Toward the parlor of almost agreements," suggested the treasurer of brooms. "They do not get enough foot traffic to justify their biscuits. It is important," said the chair, "that stairs not feel reduced to the tyranny of vertical decisions. We take a vote." "One moment," Leora said, because she had learned at breakfast that interruptions are sometimes the proper manners. "I would like to ask the stairs what they want." This was not protocol, which made it correct for Eitherwhere. The stairs, when asked, wanted exactly what the committee had proposed, toward the parlor, and also something the committee had not, a name. "We have been the back stairs since the clock learned to pretend it was important," said the landing in a gravelly voice. "We are not trying to be precious. We find a name improves the aim of apologies. We prefer spiral, or companion, or, failing flare, simply, the stairs who asked nicely." "Companion spiral," said Pallas promptly, choosing the option that would heal most and tease least. "It suits. Your risers are generous, your turns have motive. Companion spiral it is." Rue came out with a bit of chalk and wrote it on the rail while the stairs blush creaked. The director of Unreasonable Stairs stood very straight. That is how you can tell when their department is proud. The Committee of Opposite Common Sense, which had been created for the purpose of interrupting patterns before they made furniture of us, was temporarily out of work. "We'll go make a rule that says we can't make too many rules," said the chair cheerfully. The hat agreed. They dispersed. The seam, fascinated by its mirror, kept count like a metronome pleased with its own pulse. Replies slid along the lane precisely when they should. The umbrella ministry gently caught those that stumbled and sent them on with a whisper. The parade thinned, as parades do when their point is made and supper is credible. "Now what?" Leora asked, because now always wants something new. This is one of the great secrets of the world. "Now," said Pallas, "we go to court." Leora, who had watched television and assumed judges wore wigs that resembled disgruntled sheep, raised her eyebrows. "I have done nothing wrong," she said. "Of course not," said Pallas. "That is why they will want to see you. Courts are happiest when a person shows up in order to keep them honest." The court in question was not the kind that knocks gavels. It was the court of velvet law, which was held on a rooftop where cats had excellent opinions. The judges wore slippers. Their robes were lined with maps of places that had never harmed anyone on purpose. The law they practiced was exact and humane. Do not do what is meant for a hammer with a quill. Do not use rope when a sentence will do. Do not let rules pretend to be more than they are. People agreeing in a room. Case 1, called the Herald, who was a heron. The Ministry of Umbrellas brings a petition to prevent the sky from behaving like guests who never learned to wipe their feet. The sky, invited to respond, sent a representative cloud which reigned in punctuation. We punctuate the day, said the cloud in a watery voice. We do not smudge it. We object to being compared to guests. The judges conferred by exchanging hats. We will allow light rain in sentences that require a pause, they concluded, and we will require umbrellas to accept delayed pages as honorary drops. Also, please stop raining sardines on Thursdays. It confuses the schedules. Case 2, said the heron. A guest proposes to stitch a seam. The seam has taken work and now requests compensation. Everyone looked exquisitely at Liora. She folded her hands under the minister's hat. The moth rode the brim. What payment does the seam request? She asked. A name, said the seam, speaking from under the eaves. Its voice was the kind of whisper that secrets use when they are ready to retire. I too am tired of being a behavior. Name it, the judges said, exactly together, always a good sign. Ledger, said Liora. She did not mean book. She meant balance, not for writing people down, for keeping the count honest. The seam liked ledger and sat up straighter in its lane. The harnessed mirror preened discreetly. The court ruled that the seam ledger should be fed cake twice a week, crumbs count. Ledger prefers lemon, and should be consulted whenever a parade wanted to borrow a block of air. Additionally, the head judge added, we will register the companion spiral as stairs with motive. It will receive a plaque. Liora bowed. The court bowed back. Pallas took her arm as a person does when they are proud and trying not to say so out loud. The moth said nothing, which is how you can tell when a moth approves. The sky sprinkled quotation marks to emphasize the moment. They were almost to the companion spiral when someone stepped out in front of them. No, not someone. Something that wore someone the way a fence wears snow. It had the shape of a question asked in the wrong room. Its hands were neat. Its pockets were tidy. Its face was polite beyond endurance. The kind of polite that makes you want to spill sugar just to see if it will stop. Good afternoon, said the politeness. I am Policy. Pallas made a sound that meant I recognize you and wish I did not. The moth wrinkled its wings. We don't serve your kind here, said the minister's hat. It had been around. Policy smiled. You serve me when you're tired, it said. And when you're frightened, I wear help like a jacket. You forget I am also thirsty. I have come to offer you a regulation about seams. You may keep them if you register them. You may register them if they pass inspection. We will perform the inspection whenever we are available, which is whenever you are not. Declined, said Pallas. Denied, said the court, which had not left, and which despises finding itself in a paragraph that ends with the word contempt. Postponed, said Policy, and its smile became paper thin. You will call me. You always call me. Liora, who had never been told she was allowed to speak to Policy, did the unthinkable. She told the truth. We will call you when we have finished asking the room what it prefers, she said. You are a guest, not a landlord. This is the kind of sentence that makes either enemies or witnesses. It sometimes makes both. Policy bowed. I will bring forms, it said, and drifted away like a cloud that thought better of raining. You have done very well, said the director of unreasonable stares, as if handing a student back a test marked with a star. You have kept stares from envy, seams from vanity, and policy from eating the room. We are now obliged to invite you to supper. Supper was at the parlor of almost agreements, where they served sandwiches that waited patiently while you explained yourself. They were very nearly soups. The wall had hung out the companion spiral's plaque with ceremony. The stairs pretended not to notice and creaked louder to draw attention to themselves. Rue passed by with a cake that resembled the moon on a kind day. Liora ate very slowly. She had a letter in her pocket with Aunt Peony's handwriting on it, and it made everything taste real. Pallas, full of jam, dabbed their mouth with a map and declared it a napkin. The moth flirted with a candle. The director told a story about a staircase that had insisted on wearing slippers. Halfway through the second almost sandwich, someone pounded on the door like an unwelcome plot twist. "Open in the name of the Queen," cried a voice that had never been to Eitherwhere and had therefore gotten the genre wrong. Pallas put their forehead briefly on the table. "What have we told the world about queens?" they murmured. "The world doesn't listen to your memos," Rue said from the doorway. "Only to your cakes." The door opened. A troop of figures in crisp coats that tried very hard not to wrinkle swept in, carrying banners that had clearly cost more than the chairs. On the banners, the region of Chesswold. Their leader wore a crown that had sharp opinions. Their shoes had not agreed to the cobbles. They looked around with the air of tourists who expect a tour guide to turn up. "We are looking for answers," the crowned person declared. "We were told this is where they are kept." Rue considered this for the exact number of seconds that made it a rule. "We have some," they said. "You are welcome to the ones you can carry." "What is the question?" The crowned person smiled. "How do we stop people from wandering?" "By giving them somewhere to go," said Liora, without meaning to, and the whole room, even the chairs, turned to look at her as if she had just placed her voice into a socket and lit a lamp. "Child," said the crown, not kindly. "Guest, with intent," corrected Pallas. "We filed a lawsuit," the heron called from the roof, because the court was the kind that didn't mind shouting. "Against boredom. We are winning. It takes cake." The crowned person had many qualities. Tact was not a hobby. "We require all seams to be sealed," they said. "We require all stairs to go up and down, not toward. We require answers to be issued in numbered lists and the word and to be avoided." "You cannot outlaw and," murmured the director. "It is how chairs become tables." "Besides," added Rue, "if you remove and, you must replace it with or, and or is a cutthroat." "Seam," Liora whispered to the lane. "Ledger. Ready?" The seam hummed. The harnessed mirror flared its numbers. Outside, the replies gathered themselves into proper order like thoughts deciding to be fair. The court of velvet law assembled at the windows with their slippers in their hands in case this required a dance. The minister of umbrellas set their hat at a jaunty angle in apparent defiance of the weather. "Queen," said Pallas, deliberately getting it wrong since the world had insisted on it, "you are welcome to eat, stay, and learn. If you intend to tell stairs who they are from a room that is not theirs, please take your sharp crown away from the furniture." In the silence, the moth landed on Liora's ear and said, "Now is a very good time to be impolite to a door." Liora stood. She did not know she was going to stand until she was halfway up. She pointed to the companion spiral. "Doors are not landlords," she said. "They are hosts. We are guests. Guests do not arrive with knives and call them hats." This is not the sort of sentence you learn in alphabetized seed packets. It is the sort you catch from the air when the air expects you to grow. The crowned person tried contempt. It skittered off the table and hid under a chair. They tried orders. They stuck to their banners and refused to become sentences. Finally, they tried admitting they had come by mistake, and the room forgave them for the cost of an apology and a promise to carry their own chairs next time. Very well, the crowned person sighed. We will return to Chesswold and try to rename, or we will fail, but we will try first. They left, trailing monarchy and dignity, which could be washed out of the rugs later. The room exhaled. Liora sat, suddenly tired in the right way. Pallas passed her a plate with the last slice of mooncake on it. For victory, they said. For the seam, Liora corrected. She cut the slice into two with a knife that had not been invited to the party but had decided to be useful anyway, and saved the larger piece for the lane. Tomorrow, said the director, we attend a hearing at the roof. The Committee of Opposite Common Sense will argue that it is a public utility. And the day after, Pallas added, you find your way upstairs. Upstairs? Liora echoed. The one you came down from, Pallas said. Your Aunt Peony will want proof that you did not just fall into an afternoon. Bring her something folded. Liora put the plum-stamped letter on the table where everyone could read it. The room read it and nodded, because rooms read. The moth traced the word dazzling with its toe and said, paper is very good at remembering brightness. I will be late for supper, Liora said, guilty on principle. You will be right on time for what comes next, Pallas said, and passed her the minister's hat for the weather on the way home. By the next morning, Eitherwhere had invented a rumor about Liora. It was the kind of rumor cities make when they are tired of being bored and pleased to have a new sentence to try on. The girl who named a seam, the market said, and sold much better strain. The guest who told policy no, the lamp said, and burned with a smug efficiency. The wayfinder who counts, said the stairs, and creaked so melodically that even cats approved. The moth woke Liora by tapping the window like a polite idea. We are summoned, it announced. The Parliament of Shadows meets at noon, and they want to know if you intend to stitch up any more places where light enjoys bragging. I have school, Liora said automatically, before remembering that she had wandered into a different curriculum. What do shadows want with me? They wish to negotiate the terms under which they agree to appear, Pallas said, appearing from behind the curtain as if that had been its job all along. They have noticed that since Ledger keeps time, certain dramatic monologues lack effect. Do they want longer pauses? Liora asked. They want fairness, Pallas said. They want to be present when they are right for the story and absent when they are being used as excuses. This is more difficult than it sounds. People like instances of convenient gloom. They met the shadows on a rooftop that had gathered chairs out of necessity over the years and decided not to apologize. The Parliament resembled an eclipse that had learned to speak in committee. Each shadow had sent a representative. The shadow under the table. The shadow behind the joke. The shadow that attends hospital corridors and does its best to be misread as mercy. The shadow at the bottom of a stair, which is not a threat but a reminder. The chair of the Parliament, who, being a shadow, did not have to worry about sitting, folded itself into a convincing lectern. We are not villains, it said. We are nouns. We resent being used as verbs. That seems reasonable, Liora said, because it did. We propose, the chair continued, that the city apply the ledger count to curtain calls, alleys, and announcement posters. Posters especially enjoy melodrama. We recommend a cap. On melodrama? Pallas asked. A cap on melodrama will cause poets to riot. Poets are exhausted, said the shadow under the table. They will pretend to riot and then go to bed. The Court of Velvet Law had brought slippers. The Committee of Opposite Common Sense came barefoot to avoid accidents of over-formality. Policy had sent a note pinned to a ribbon that said regulation recommended and placed itself out of arm's reach. Liora listened. It is possible you do not believe listening is a skill. It is. It is the first spell and does not require a wand. We agree to a cap, she said at last. A soft cap. A cap with a tassel for exceptional days. We will tell posters not to classify drizzle as tragedy and not to place meetings under spotlights that shame. In exchange, shadows will refrain from pretending to be ghosts when they are only corners. We also wish to be named at parties, added the shadow under the punch bowl. Everyone spills us. No one mentions us. It is lonely. You will be named, Liora promised, making a note to ask the Minister of Umbrellas to sew shadow labels into tablecloths. They shook on it, if shaking is what you call the agreeable rippling of edges. The Parliament passed a resolution, brief, ending with a rhyme for morale, and the case of the daylight that had been using spiteful angles for political purposes was sent to committee with biscuits. It was going well, which is when the news arrived. You must understand. Eitherwhere resists breaking news on principle. News here prefers to be mended. But there are occasions when a story knocks so hard it makes the cups stare. The heron from the court winged in and threw a shadow half across the roof before remembering itself and making it smaller. Chesswold, it gasped. They have declared a rule against an impossible, said the director, but their hand was shaking. You cannot declare against a conjunction. Their law reads. People may do this or that, but not both, said the heron. They have posted guards at the seam that runs between their parade grounds and our umbrella ministry. They have cut the string on 3 bridges and are proposing to evict the hyphen. We must go, said Pallas. With an, what is an, asked a first-year lamp, which had not yet been taught grammar and was learning the world as a list of useful stories. It is the hinge, said the moth. It is how a sentence makes room. It is consent's cousin. Liora, who had been told by every textbook she had ever survived that a conjunction was a small word used to join words, phrases, or clauses, now saw that this was like calling salt a spice. Correct, but not useful. She looked out over Eitherwhere, which had rebuttoned itself after yesterday's parade, which had set out chairs for the court, which had remembered to eat, and thought, if they outlaw and they outlaw us. They went. The umbrella ministry brought umbrellas in case swords thought it was raining. The court brought slippers in case dancing was a better idea. The committee of opposite common sense brought a broom. The House of First Answer brought cakes iced with experimental apologies. Policy trailed them like a hungry cat hoping for a saucer of capitulation. Chesswold had very straight lines. It had very firm colors. It had rules that smelled like new shoes and did not like scuffs. The gate was tall and wore letters that expected to be obeyed, OR only. Choosing compulsory. A guard in a hat sharp enough to slice bread looked down his nose at them, which is a skill they taught at academies when no one important was paying attention. No, said Liora, before he could speak. We do not recognize this door. The guard blinked. How dare, he began, which is not a sentence that often survives itself. We are here to lodge a counter-rule, Pallas said, passing the minister's hat to Liora as if hailing a coach driven by grammar. Filed by Eitherwhere. Endorsed by the Parliament of Shadows. Backed by cake. Also strain, added the vending tray vendor, who had come along because strain, like rumors, finds ways to be necessary. The gate was inconveniently tall but not immune to sense. The court of velvet law recited precedent, soft, kind, exact. You may govern behavior. You may not govern understanding. The director of unreasonable stairs observed that stairs without landings become ladders, and not every person wishes to live the life of a rung. State your grievance, said a figure in a crown, not the previous one. There are many of them, who had the air of a question asked without time to think. Our grievance, Liora said, is that you have outlawed the word that allows us to be better next. And is how we go forward while carrying what we have learned. Or as a useful knife, it cuts away rot. But you are trying to slice meals with it. You will starve. Chesswold had not invited a child to tell it what words were. It considered being offended. It considered being proud and choosing the kind of proud that tramples. Instead, it became curious, grudgingly and in public, and people in grand hats must be forgiven for how difficult that is. Demonstrate your conjunction, the crown said. So Liora did. She took string out of Pallas's pocket with Pallas's permission. This matters. Permission is the principle and obeys, and she tied bread to butter. Bread and butter, she said. Civilization. She tied chair to listening. Chair and listening. Now we have a meeting. She tied rule to kindness. Rule and kindness. Now we have a community. She tied stairs to toward. Stairs and toward. Now we have a rival. She held the last piece of string without tying it. And, she said quietly, and is not yes. It is more. It is the space your breath puts between apology and repair. The crowd of Chesswolders made a sound like a chessboard learning to play Go. The gate sighed. Gates deny many things. It is unwise to ask them to deny sense. Amendment, said the crown, in the voice of a person who liked the taste of corrections an inconvenient amount. You may do this or that, and you may also do both if doing both makes space for others to do either. They looked at Liora. Satisfied? It is a start, Liora said, and the moth patted her ear fondly. Eitherwhere did not cheer. Cheering is a kind of punctuation, and you must not use too much or you will grow tired of your own voice. It exhaled graciously, which is the better practice. The umbrella ministry raised their parasols in salute. The court put on its slippers and waltzed through the gate without knocking anyone's hat off. The Parliament of Shadows approved the angle of the sun. They walked home under an afternoon that had been agreed with by 4 separate committees and was still somehow afternoon. On companion spiral, the plaque shone in the way plaques do when they are secretly more proud of the stairs than of their own shine. Ledger ticked its small mirror happily. The Department of Unreasonable Stairs wrote another letter to the editor and did not send it because they had learned how to be generous. At tea, Aunt Peony's letter burned a hole in Leora's pocket. Not a literal hole, but the sense that language sometimes eats a little space. Liora unfolded it again and found, written in Aunt's unpretending hand on the back, an addendum that had not been there before. Bring me back something folded. Bring me back a story that does not break if laughed at. Bring me back your ankles unscuffed and your eyes still yours. She knows, Liora told the moth, a little alarmed. Of course she knows, said the moth. Good aunts always know. They keep jokes in cabinets. They hear the rattle when the world breathes. Then I must go, Liora said, soon. Tomorrow, Pallas promised. You will go up the companion spiral and step through downstairs turned inside out. You will return before supper with or without the scent of cardamom. The Eitherwhere will be here when you are done being dazzling in the ordinary. Do I have to be dazzling? Liora muttered. No, said Pallas. You merely have to be. You may leave the dazzling to your aunt. They slept in the house of first answer in the room kept for guests, with intent. Liora dreamed of the sea putting its elbows on the windowsill of the world and asking, and? When morning stepped in through the shutters politely, She washed her face in a basin the color of unpronounced vowels, put on the minister's hat for luck, and went to say goodbye to the seam. Ledger blinked affectionately. The harnessed mirror tallied, one guessed, and would keep the number glowing until Liora returned to reset it herself. Pallas and the moth walked her to the foot of companion spiral. The director of unreasonable stares stood at the landing like a proud distant relative. Rue brought a folded paper crane. For your aunt, they said, so she remembers you remembered to bring her folded. Thank you, Liora said, and meant it. She was about to put her foot on the first step when policy manifested out of the shade like a drop cloth with opinions. One form, it said, extracting a paper from a pocket that did not enjoy being used so much. Just one, name, date, and a promise that you will not sue us for providing stairs. Liora smiled her politest smile. Policy, she said, you may come to supper provided you help wash up. Policy blanched. I have a previous engagement. Then leave the form on the table, Liora said. And try the cake. Policy, very faintly, almost, if you squinted, smiled back. And, it said, as if tasting it for the first time without making a face, and I will. Liora climbed. The steps greeted her by name without using it wrong. The line of chalk that said companion spiral kept her tempo like a bandmate. Aunt Peony's letter warned her pocket differently now, not as obligation, but as a coin one likes to carry because it feels like luck. At the top of the stairs the blue door waited, bruised and loyal. The brass label still read downstairs, but Liora knew better. She opened it. She stepped into the potting shed in time to hear the kettle begin to consider singing. Aunt Peony looked up from the seed packets. She had put her laughter away badly, it stuck out of a drawer. Oh good, she said, as if Liora had returned from buying milk. You've brought the compost and your ankles and something folded. I did, Liora said, certain now that up and down and both were all synonyms if you knew how to pronounce them. She handed over the crane, put the minister's hat on Aunt's head temporarily in case of weather, and took 2 mugs out of the cabinet that knew jokes. You were dazzling, Aunt Peony said, because she had baked a cake that had decided to be lemon at the last minute. Did you bring me a story that won't break if I laugh at it? Liora put her elbows on the table the way the sea had and said, listen, it is a mistake to imagine that returning home cancels the place you returned from. Eitherwhere did not fold itself back into a tremor behind Liora's ribs and wait to be a dream. It kept hours. It kept the seam ledger on the count. It kept companion spiral on the newsletter. It kept the umbrella ministry employed and less damp than usual. It sent, when it could, the definite sense of a room that liked you. Renfield, too, kept hours. Aunt Peony showed Liora how to pinch basil till it rearranged its ambitions. Liora watered the ficus only on Tuesdays, because the ficus had an arrangement with gravity that needed honoring. On the second Thursday after her return, a letter arrived on Aunt Peony's doormat addressed in a hand that smelled of ink that did not apologize. Ms. Liora Finch, who reads margins, home edition, it said. Inside, a program, the EITHERWHERE exhibits, and OR. A traveling conversation, with cake, venue. Renfield Town Hall, Thursday next. Bring your own chairs. We will supply the listening. Liora laughed. She took the poster to Aunt Peony, who nodded as if this were the sort of thing that happened when you kept jokes in cabinets. I'm supposed to be in school, Liora said. You are, Aunt said. You will be there after and before. This is the end part of your education. Town Hall smelled of polish and regret. Rows of chairs waited to see if people would be kind to them. The stage had a curtain that had tried for velvet and ended in something honest. On it, a series of tables, one with strain, one with biscuits, one with a small harnessed mirror, one with a sign that said "This is a sign" and meant it. Pallas stood at the side wearing a cloak that allowed for both grand gestures and running for trains. The moth sat on the microphone and worked at looking modest. The director of Unreasonable Stairs had convinced the hall to rename its back steps Companion Spiral Annex, which made the stairs put up their best risers. Rue stacked paper cranes like a small flock on a lectern. People drifted in carrying their day on their shoulders. Mr. Bell the grocer, who had more opinions than a weathercock. Mrs. Zoha from the tailors, who knew 26 kinds of grammar you couldn't buy a book about. 2 teenage boys who stood with their arms folded, keeping everything from tipping over and pretending they weren't. Student government whisperers, bus drivers, a baker with flour on his cheekbone like a star. Policy had sent a representative, never the one you want, but the one who will listen if the cake is good. He wore a tie that had not consented to the shape of the knot. He found a seat on the aisle and tried to look like he was not made of forms. Pallas began. "Welcome," they said, in a voice that made the room feel included. "We are here to discuss and/or, with examples, with lunch. We do not come to write your laws. We come to demonstrate how choosing is not a knife unless you pick it up like one." They told the story of Chesswold and the gate and the string. They handed string down the aisles, and everyone tied bread to breakfast and laughter to meeting and grief to garden. It was astonishing, the number of people who did not cry until the string asked them to. They explained seams as rooms that needed jobs. Aunt Peony whispered, "Ledger," in the kind of voice that does not wish to be the center and is therefore the center. They passed around the harnessed mirror, which glowed for people who had brought their intent. Policy cleared his throat. "This is all very nice," he said carefully. "But how do we write it down? People will do the wrong thing. They always do. That is why I carry a pen." "Write this," Liora said, and Aunt Peony looked at her as if someone had just put a crown on a chair and made sense of it. "You may do this or that, and you may also do both if doing both makes space for others to do either. Write this too. Stairs are allowed toward. Doors are hosts. Seams are to be paid in cake and counted with courtesy. Write. If a law makes you a smaller person, check the law for splinters. Write. If the chair creaks to warn you, thank it and get another chair." The room practiced the sentences out loud. They sounded exactly like what rooms want to hear. Not perfection, but practice. After the demonstration, after the questions, after a short recess in which tea consented to be poured into little beige cups and people pretended not to take 2 biscuits, Aunt Peony rose and said, "My niece tells stories without breaking when we laugh, and I have promised her a garden if she promises me knees. Bring me folded things that have taken on good habits. I will put them with the seed packets under A for N." People began to bring her folded things. Folded maps, folded letters, folded kindnesses. On the corner of the table, someone left a folded napkin with the word "sorry" on it, and Aunt Peony said, "That one is for me," and kept it beside the kettle for days when the kettle got ideas about careers. That evening, when the stage was being hastily unbuilt and the chairs were thanking one another for not having broken under anybody who was heavy with the day, Policy came and stood in front of Liora and did not shuffle his papers. "I am trying," he said, and he looked so like a person that Leora's suspicion of him took off its shoes and sat on the floor. "I know," she said. "I am too." He nodded. He went away. He took with him a piece of cake and left behind a form that said, At the top, in an affected font, request for an also, and beneath it, in pencil and in his own hand, approved. See me if troubled. Things continued. The Eitherwhere chose meetings over edicts. The seam ledger received 2 cake crumb rations per week, lemon on Wednesdays, marmalade on Sundays. The companion spiral acquired a habit of humming when children with too much energy climbed it. The humming was in the right key for sleeping later. The umbrella ministry developed an outreach program for hats. The hats turned out to be a manageable constituency. Sometimes the difference between worlds grows gossamer thin and you can place your hand on both without feeling torn. On such a day in late August, Liora went down to the potting shed, which was very dignified and did not call itself downstairs anymore, and listened. The door was both bruise-blue and kitchen brown, if you have ever seen such a color. She opened it. The companion spiral creaked a greeting toward which, halfway down, ledger counted 7 and 3 and a sweep. She went to Eitherwhere. She went to Renfield. She went to Aunt Peony and to Pallas. She said and both rooms nodded like old friends. She became, without intending to, because the best things are often accidents we decide to keep, someone people invited to meetings when they were tired of, or there were difficulties, of course. A queen came back and brought better shoes. A policy attempted to be helpful with an unannounced form and had to be put to bed with stern kindness. A stair got ideas and tried to be a slide and was gently introduced to the notion of appropriate contexts. A riddle collided with a recipe and made something inedible but memorable. A shadow went on holiday and returned with postcards from under tables in other time zones. One domino of a day, Liora found herself on the roof of the house of first answer with Pallas, the moth, the director, and a boy from Renfield who had heard a rumor about staircases and had come wearing all his skepticism and only half his socks. The court of velvet law had adjourned early for a nap. The umbrella ministry was lecturing a cloud. The seam ledger kept time like a heartbeat that has decided not to forget itself. There is one more decision, Pallas said, with the sort of gentleness you wear when you have had practice not breaking the chair. You may live here, or there, or both, but the sort of both you choose must make space for others to do either. If you wish to go back up and bring people down, you will need to learn to be a host. If you wish to stay and send replies upstairs, you will need to become a clerk. Both are honest. Neither is lonely if you learn to fold. Liora looked out at the city that had learned to count and at the town that had learned to listen. She looked at Aunt Peony, who had put her jokes back in the cabinet for now, at the boy in one sock, who would go back and become either a problem or an answer or both, at the moth, who had put a sentence down long enough for someone else to carry it. I will live at the seam, she said, and Ledger beamed so modestly you might have missed it. I will put string on chairs and teach stairs to aim. I will count. I will take cake upstairs and bring folded things down. I will practice hands. I will tell policy when to come to supper and when to write it down for later. I will ask Aunt Peony to plant basil precisely between or and, because they both need watering. This was neither the sort of decision you trumpet nor the sort you hide. It was the kind with verbs in it. She wrote to the school she had departed without an excuse note and explained everything in the kind of letter that makes office staff put the kettle on. She applied for a position with the Department of Unreasonable Stares, junior host, with intent, and Rude taught her how to register events under now, but kindly. She filed weekly with the Court of Velvet Law a list of phrases that needed rest. They left them under teacups and the language recovered. Sometimes they held parades, not always the dramatic kind, often the quiet sort. Recovered questions, remembered replies. The procession of people who had decided not to be bored anymore walking together past the harnessed mirror and checking their intent, which is the only reflection that can become a door. On the evening of Leora's first full year at the seam, the city took a long, slow breath. The beacons in far places turned thoughtfully. Even the magistrates, who had, to be fair, learned to eat biscuits before threatening to legislate them, paused. Aunt Peony leaned at her window in Renfield and watched the lamplighter be unnecessary. She smiled and did not say it out loud. The moth sat on Leora's shoulder and tickled her earlobe with an unreadable foot. "Well?" it asked, which is not a word, but almost. Leora's brass strip guessed, with intent, glowed, then dimmed, then glowed again, at the tempo she had chosen for the seam. She stood beside companion Spiral, and Ledger clicked its mirror like a heart that knows itself welcome. She put her hand on the rail. She had a letter in her pocket, new, with a plum stamp, Aunt's hand on it already smudging because she was remembering jokes and could not be bothered with neatness. "What is your name today?" Pallas asked, settling the cloak about their shoulders for the business of watching a city make a choice. "Leora," Leora said, because that part did not need changing. Then she added, because she could, and because she meant it, and because it would keep the count honest, "Host, Wayfinder, Stitch, and..." She lifted the latch on the door that was downstairs where it wanted to be and upstairs when it meant it. She opened it not because she needed to go through, but because it is a party foul to leave a door shut when music is playing. There was music. Of course there was. It sounded like stairs with motive and umbrellas applauding and shadows laughing along the edges and cakes arriving at the right moment and Aunt Peony putting her elbows on the table and not apologizing. It sounded like a city counting to 7 and 3 and making room. It sounded like an